The screen flickered, casting a blue hue across the room, but Noah Parker did not care about the high score flashing in the corner. He watched the way the digistries swayed, tracked how the music swelled when the character stepped into the clearing. At 10 years old, he was not playing. He was dissecting the illusion. A notebook lay open on the carpet, filled with hand-drawn grids and intricate maps of a forest that existed only in his mind. He tapped his pencil against the paper, calculating the distance between the digital horizon and the player's line of sight. His parents stood in the doorway, their voices dropping into the familiar tone of concern. They spoke of stability. They spoke of accounting and math that did not involve dragons or shifting landscapes. They patted his head, their hands lingering as if to ground him in the real world. Noah waited for the door to click shut. The moment the latch engaged, he turned back to the page. He ignored the score, ignored the advice, and started sketching the next level. He was building a world, and he did not need permission to finish it. 10 years later, the blue light of a bedroom screen had been replaced by the sterile glow of a cubicle monitor. Noah Parker sat hunched over a keyboard, his spine aching from 10 hours of repetitive labor. The air in the studio was thick with stale coffee and the hum of ventilation. His supervisor walked by, dropping a thick stack of papers onto his desk. The list of requirements was impossible, a litany of bug fixes and feature additions meant to stretch the team to the breaking point. Around him, the office erupted in frustrated sighs. Colleagues grabbed their bags, voices heavy with resentment as they complained about the grind. Noah did not join them. He reached for his mouse, his hand steady despite the fatigue radiating through his shoulders. He clicked the icon in the corner of his desktop. A folder appeared, labeled Project Vision. While the rest of the room focused on the clock, Noah opened a new file. He stared at the blank cursor, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. He ignored the pile of demands on his desk and the rising chatter of his peers. He had spent years waiting for this moment. He began to type, the rhythm of the keys cutting through the office noise, anchoring him to the world he was finally building for himself. The office lights dimmed, but Noah did not leave. He crawled onto a thin cot tucked beneath his desk, the space smelling of dust and electronics. He pulled a worn book from his bag, the pages underlined with firm, black ink. He read the words again. A definite purpose is the starting point of all achievement. He whispered them to the dark underside of the desk, letting the philosophy settle into his tired muscles. He woke 3 hours later, the office silent, and sat back at his monitor. He compiled the first version of his game. The progress bar crawled forward, a thin green line of hope. He clicked the icon. The screen flashed once, a burst of color, and then went pitch black. The application hung, then vanished. A fatal error message flickered in the center of the display. He sat motionless as the reality took hold. The months of work, the nights on the floor, the code he had painstakingly woven it had all collapsed in a single second. His jaw tightened. He did not curse. He did not stand up to pace. He simply reached for his keyboard, cleared the error, and began to delete the corrupted files. He would rewrite every line before the sun rose. He started again. The second version lacked sound. Noah leaned into his cheap microphone, whispering sound effects into the empty office, his voice raspy from lack of sleep. He recorded the wind, the metallic clatter of the game world, and the crunch of digital footsteps, but the cost of progress was rising. The bank notification arrived on his screen. Balance 0. He looked out the window at his car parked in the lot below. It was his only asset, his only link to the world outside the studio. He listed it for sale that afternoon. The money vanished into server fees the moment it hit his account. He returned to the keyboard. The third version loaded, but it was unstable. Characters flickered in and out of existence, and the floor dropped away beneath the player in random bursts of static. Yet, the story held. The logic of his digital world was solid, even if the frame was jagged. He sat in the dark, his stomach hollow. Watching the screen, he had no money left, no vehicle, and no backup plan. He took a sip of cold, bitter coffee and adjusted the code, his eyes bloodshot, his hands trembling slightly as he hammered out the next sequence of commands. He had gambled everything on a vision that existed only in lines of text. The silence did not arrive all at once. It seeped in, day after day, for 4 years. The calendar pages turned, but Noah's world remained locked inside the glowing rectangle of his monitor. He stopped answering calls. He stopped leaving the building except for groceries bought with credit he could barely service. Then came the questions from the few who still checked in. They stood in the doorway of his cubicle or called on speakerphone, their voices sharp with disbelief. 4 years, Noah? You have nothing to show for it? One asked, laughter masking the judgment. You sold your car for this? A glitchy mess that pays zero? Another pressed, listing the life milestones he had missed while they bought houses and took vacations. The words hung in the stale air, heavy and suffocating. They painted a picture of a man wasting his prime, chasing a ghost while reality crumbled around him. Noah listened to the static of their doubts, the agonizing weight of their logic pressing against his ribs. He looked at his bank app. The red numbers confirmed their worst fears. He had no answer that would satisfy them. He simply muted the call, turned his chair back to the screen, and opened the source file. The cursor blinked in the empty line, a rhythmic pulse in the quiet room. Outside, the world moved forward. Inside, time had stopped, leaving him alone with the question of whether every sacrifice had been for nothing. Tuesday morning felt identical to every other day. Noah was hunched over the keyboard, eyes tracing the same lines of code he had polished for hundreds of hours. The office was quiet, save for the hum of the ventilation system. Then his phone vibrated against the desk, a short, sharp buzz that cut through the monotony. He ignored it. It buzzed again, and again, a frantic, rhythmic pulse that would not stop. He picked it up, expecting another notice about a missed payment or an overdue bill. Instead, he saw a notification from a gaming platform. A popular streamer was live, and the title of the broadcast featured his project. Noah clicked the link. The screen showed his digital forest, rendered in real time, being explored by someone who had never seen it before. He refreshed his server dashboard. The numbers were not just climbing, they were accelerating. The load bars on his monitor, usually dormant, turned from green to a warning yellow, then flickered toward red. The internal cooling fans of his workstation began to whine. Struggling to process the sudden influx of data, he watched the connection requests pouring in, a relentless flood of activity that threatened to overwhelm the system he had built in solitude. The air in the room felt heavy, charged with the sudden, undeniable friction of a dormant dream waking up to face the world. The numbers on the dashboard ticked upward with a terrifying, beautiful velocity. 10 users, 100, 1,000. Noah watched the counter, his fingers hovering over the keys as the data stream became a blur. The server load monitor climbed past 80%, then 90%, the fans in his machine roaring to a frantic, mechanical howl. He scrambled to allocate more bandwidth, his movements sharp and precise, fighting to keep the digital world from collapsing under the weight of the sudden crowd. By the hour's end, the tally hit 10,000. The sheer force of the traffic felt like a physical pressure in the room. He leaned back, the blue light of the screen washing over his face, reflecting the thousands of active connections now flooding his creation. The silence of the previous years was shattered by the relentless, synchronized movement of players exploring the terrain he had mapped in isolation. It was no longer just his project. It was a living, breathing space inhabited by a multitude. He saw the chat logs scrolling too fast to read, messages of wonder and discovery pouring in from strangers. The realization hit him with the force of a landslide. The years of doubt, the sold assets, and the nights on the cot had led to this exact chaotic second. The world had finally arrived. The server load stabilized, but the notifications did not. A new alert chimed every few seconds. Someone had donated. Then another. Then 100. The bank portal showed his balance climbing, digits stacking into a figure he had never seen before. Money flowed in a steady, relentless stream, a direct reward for the years he spent in the dark. Beside the financial reports, the review section of the platform expanded into a waterfall of text. Players wrote about the hidden depth of the forest, the logic of the puzzles, and the way the world responded to their choices. It was the validation he had chased since age 10. Yet Noah did not look at the mounting total. He did not read the praise. Instead, his eyes were locked on a single line of code. A player had reported a character clipping through a wall in the 3rd sector. He felt the weight of the fame beginning to press against his door. But he locked it out. He adjusted his chair, cracked his knuckles, and began typing. The profit could wait. The game had a flaw, and he was the only one who could fix it. He worked with the same intensity he had when he was penniless, his focus narrowing until the world outside his monitor ceased to exist. A young developer pulled up a chair, eyes wide as he gestured toward the screen. "What is the secret, Noah? How do you scale to 1 million like this?" Noah did not answer immediately. He clicked a minimized window on his desktop. The bank statement expanded, displaying a 7-figure balance. The young developer gasped, leaning in to count the zeros. Noah looked at the screen for a fleeting second, then clicked it shut, his face devoid of excitement. He moved the cursor to his integrated development environment instead. "The money is a byproduct," Noah said, his voice flat. He highlighted a complex block of logic that governed the game's terrain. "This is the secret." He pointed to the lines of syntax, the foundation of the world he had built. "If you chase the balance, you lose the code. If you chase the code, the balance finds you." The young developer stared at the wall of text, confused by the lack of strategy. Noah ignored him. He was already scrolling through the script, searching for a memory leak that had been bothering him for hours. To him, the $1 million was just a static variable in a larger, much more intricate program. He returned to his work, his fingers dancing across the keys, leaving the young man to stare at a fortune that Noah had already forgotten. Noah turned his chair back to the primary display. On screen, the digital forest he had sketched as a child stood in high-definition clarity. The leaves swayed with a calculated randomness he had spent years perfecting. He traced the edge of the monitor with a steady finger. This was the promise kept. The silence in the office felt different now, no longer a weight, but a blank canvas. He watched the character he had drawn at 10 walk through the virtual trees, a perfect realization of his earliest ambition. He felt the tension in his shoulders finally dissipate. The goal was reached, and the path forward was wide open. Noah reached out and flipped the power switch. The screen went black, reflecting his own image for a brief second before he stood up. He left the desk, the office, and the $1 million reality behind him. His mind was already elsewhere, drifting through new landscapes and complex mechanics. He walked out into the cool evening air, his pace quick and purposeful. He was not looking back at what he had built. He was already drafting the blueprints for the next world, brick by digital brick, his hands moving to the rhythm of an idea that had yet to take form.